Most of us remember a specific vegetable patch from somewhere in our lives. Maybe it was at your grandmother's house, along the back fence where you were not supposed to play. Maybe it was at your mother's first home, the one you visited every Sunday when you were small. Maybe it was at an aunt's farmhouse, where green spears came up every April for as long as anyone in the family could remember. Those traditional beds last that long. 30 years, 40 years, sometimes longer. The patch your grandmother planted as a young bride was still feeding the family when her great-grandchildren were old enough to help pick the harvest. That is not a small thing. That is what perennial food does. There are 11 plants exactly like that. 11 perennial food crops that you put into the ground once, with one afternoon of careful work, and they keep producing food year after year, decade after decade, often for the entire rest of the time you live in your home. 3 of them you will recognize immediately from your own family history. The classic stalks, spears, and berries our grandmothers kept along the side of the house. Some of them you have likely heard of but never planted, because nobody ever told you how easy they actually are. And 2 of them are so unusual that most everyday gardeners today have never heard of them. One of them genuinely replants itself across your garden by walking. The other is a native North American plant that produces underground tubers tasting like a cross between a potato and a nut. All 11 of those plants are on this list. What I want you to take away from this video, more than anything else, is that perennial food gardening is one of the few things in modern life that genuinely connects what you do today to what your grandmother did 70 years ago and to what your grandchildren will inherit from you long after you are gone. The plants in this video are not trendy. They are not new. Some of them have been growing in backyards continuously for 200 years. Your job is not to chase the latest gardening fashion. Your job is to put 11 of the most reliable, longest-lived, most generous food plants in human history into the ground around your home, and to let them do what they have always done. I am going to walk you through all 11. The order matters, because the unfamiliar ones come later. Before I show you the first plant, I want to take just 1 minute to tell you about something I have been working on for the last several months. Many of you have asked me whether I have a book or a written guide that brings together everything we cover on this channel into one place. I have been listening, and I am finishing one right now, a complete guide called The Plant Once Garden, written specifically for women like you. Perennials that come back every year, plants that thrive in containers, the shrubs that bring hummingbirds and cardinals to your kitchen window. The hydrogen peroxide method explained completely. 6 full garden plans you can copy directly into your yard. A no-labor planting calendar for every month of the year. All of it in one beautifully designed reference book you can keep on your kitchen counter for the next 20 years. Before it launches publicly, I want to ask you something honestly, because your answer is going to help me decide how to price it. The book contains roughly 140 pages of carefully written content, 90 perennial plant entries with complete growing details for your zone, 6 full garden plans, a hand-drawn heritage cover, and the kind of warm peer-to-peer voice you already know from these videos. Looking at what is inside, which of these 3 prices feels right to you for what this book delivers? $44.80, $35.98, or $28.89? Drop your answer in the comments below. Just type the price you think is fair. I will read every single comment, and your responses will help me set the final price before the book launches in the next few weeks. Now back to the list, and the first perennial food you should plant this season. Plant 1. Asparagus, Asparagus officinalis. The undisputed king of perennial food plants. In American gardening, and the plant that most clearly demonstrates everything that is wonderful about plant once edible gardening. A single asparagus bed planted carefully this spring will produce fresh gourmet spears every April and May for the next 20 to 30 years, from one afternoon of work. The way asparagus grows is what makes it so valuable. The plant develops a deep underground root system called a crown, with the spears growing up from the crown each spring as the soil warms. You plant the crowns once, 2 feet apart, in well-prepared soil. You wait 2 to 3 years for the bed to establish. Then for the next 2 to 3 decades, you walk out every spring and harvest fresh asparagus daily through the harvest season. which runs from late April through early June, depending on your climate. Plant asparagus crowns in early spring in a sunny location, with deep, rich, well-drained soil. Choose a spot that will not need to be dug up for other purposes for the next 30 years, because asparagus will be living there for that long. Buy 1-year-old crowns from a garden center or mail-order nursery. The variety Jersey Knight is the most reliable for American gardens. Plant the crowns 6 inches deep in a trench. Cover lightly with soil at first, and gradually fill the trench as the crowns grow through their first season. The first 2 years, do not harvest at all. The plants are building their root systems. The 3rd year, harvest lightly for 2 weeks. Year 4 and beyond, harvest fully for 6 to 8 weeks each spring. A bed of 20 crowns produces a beautiful, fresh harvest every single week during peak season. Over a 30-year bed life, that is conservatively $10,000 worth of fresh gourmet spears from an initial planting that cost you less than a pair of good gardening shoes. One mistake to avoid with asparagus. Do not harvest after the spears begin to look thin, about the diameter of a pencil. Once spear diameter shrinks, the plant is signaling that it needs to send up ferny growth to feed the crown for next year. Cutting thin spears weakens the bed for future seasons. Stop harvesting when spears thin out. Let the rest grow into the tall, ferny foliage you see in mature asparagus beds, and let the plant feed itself for next spring. Cut the ferns down in late fall after they yellow, and the cycle begins again. Following this simple rule keeps an asparagus bed producing strong spears for the full 30-year lifespan. Plant 2. Rhubarb, Rheum rhabarbarum, the virtually indestructible perennial that pushes up tart, vibrant red and pink stalks every spring for decades from a single planting. Rhubarb is the plant your grandmother grew without ever thinking about it, and the plant you can grow without ever thinking about it either. Once established, it requires almost no attention and produces reliably for 30 to 40 years. Rhubarb forms a substantial clump with large green leaves on long, thick stalks, colored pink, red, or sometimes green depending on the variety. The stalks emerge in early spring, often before any other food plant is ready to harvest, and continue producing through late spring and early summer. The stalks are what you eat, chopped into pieces and cooked with sugar for pies, crisps, jams, sauces, and the classic strawberry-rhubarb combinations. One critically important note before we go any further: only eat the stalks. The leaves contain oxalic acid in concentrations high enough to be toxic. Never eat the leaves under any circumstances. Never put them in your compost where they might be mistaken for edible greens. And always cut the leaves off and discard them when you harvest the stalks. The stalks themselves are completely safe and delicious. Plant rhubarb crowns in early spring in a sunny location with rich, well-drained soil. Choose Victoria or Canada Red for the most reliable American garden varieties. Plant crowns 3 feet apart at a depth where the buds are just an inch below the soil surface. Do not harvest the first year. The second year, harvest lightly for 2 to 3 weeks. Year 3 and beyond, harvest freely from May through June. A single mature rhubarb plant produces 3 to 5 pounds of stalks per season, replacing roughly $20 to $30 worth of rhubarb at the grocery store every year for 30 to 40 years. The math is brutal in your favor. Plant 3. Strawberries, perennial heritage varieties. Specifically the perennial varieties that send out runners and propagate themselves naturally across the garden, the June-bearing types, and the alpine strawberry varieties. These are not the annual hybrid strawberries sold in plastic clamshells at big box stores. These are the heritage perennial strawberries that carpet the ground, replant themselves every year, and produce reliably for 10 to 15 years from a single initial planting. June-bearing strawberries produce one large harvest in early summer, with the plants sending out runners during the growing season that root themselves and become new plants by fall. Within 3 years, 25 initial plants will have become 100 plants, naturally expanding the patch without any additional purchases. Alpine strawberries produce smaller, more intensely flavored berries from spring through fall. Do not send runners but do self-seed prolifically, and form a permanent ground cover that requires almost no maintenance. Plant strawberry crowns in early spring, in full sun, in well-drained soil, amended with compost. Space June-bearing plants 18 inches apart in rows 3 feet apart. Alpine strawberries can be spaced closer at 12 inches apart. The most important detail is planting depth. The crown of the plant, where the leaves emerge from, must sit exactly at the soil surface. Planting too deep rots the crown. Planting too shallow dries it out. The first year after planting, remove all flowers on June-bearing varieties to encourage strong root development. Sounds painful, but the second year you get a far stronger harvest. Year 2 and beyond, harvest freely from late May through early July. A mature bed of 25 strawberry plants produces 15 to 25 pounds of fresh berries per year, replacing $75 to $150 worth of grocery store strawberries annually. Combine that with the homegrown flavor that bears no resemblance to the watery red orbs sold at the store, and strawberries become one of the most rewarding perennial foods in any American garden. One mistake to avoid with strawberries. Do not let the patch get overgrown with too many runners and crowded plants. By year 3, the bed will be packed with daughter plants from runners, and if left alone, the overcrowding reduces fruit production dramatically. Every fall, walk through the patch and thin it out. Remove the oldest plants, typically the original ones from 3 or 4 years back. Space the younger plants to about a foot apart, and the bed renews itself. With this simple annual thinning, a strawberry bed continues producing strong harvests for 10 to 15 years before needing complete renovation. Plant 4. Sorrel, common or French. The early spring perennial green that pushes up bright green leaves long before any annual lettuce can handle the cold. Sorrel is the plant the grocery store almost never carries, because the leaves are so delicate they cannot be shipped without bruising. The only way to eat sorrel reliably is to grow it yourself. Sorrel produces clumps of arrow-shaped or oval green leaves with a distinctive bright lemony tart flavor that makes it one of the most useful spring greens in any kitchen. The flavor is unlike any other green. Sharp, citrusy, almost tangy, completely different from spinach or lettuce. Used fresh in salads, blended into soups, the classic French sorrel soup is a famous dish, or chopped into eggs and fish dishes, sorrel adds a brightness no other green can provide. Plant sorrel crowns or seeds in early spring in partial shade to full sun in moist, well-drained soil. The plant tolerates a wide range of conditions and is hardy across most of the United States. Space plants 12 inches apart. The plants grow quickly and begin producing harvestable leaves within 6 weeks of planting in their first year. Harvest leaves as needed by picking them from the outside of the clump, leaving the center to continue growing. The major maintenance task for sorrel is removing the flower stalks when they appear in early summer. The plant tries to flower and set seed, which weakens the leaf production. Cut the flower stalks off at the base as soon as they appear. The plant responds by producing more fresh leaves, extending the harvest from spring all the way through fall. A single mature sorrel plant lives for 8 to 10 years from a single planting and produces enough leaves to supply a household with a steady spring through fall harvest of one of the most delicious and overlooked greens in American gardening. Plant 5. Egyptian walking onions, Allium times proliferum. And this is the first surprise of this video, the plant I mentioned at the beginning that genuinely replants itself across your garden by walking. Walking onions are one of the most fascinating and useful perennial vegetables in American horticulture, and almost no American gardener has ever planted them or even heard of them. Here is how walking onions work, and why the name fits the plant exactly. The onion forms a small bulb underground, the same as a regular onion. From the bulb, a single tall, hollow green stalk grows up. Instead of producing flowers at the top of the stalk like most plants, the walking onion produces a cluster of small mini onions, called bulbils or topsets, at the top of the stalk in summer. As the cluster of mini onions grows heavier, the stalk gradually bends over from the weight. Eventually, the cluster touches the ground. Once the mini onions touch the soil, they take root immediately and begin growing as new, full-sized onion plants. The original plant has effectively walked itself to a new location and replanted itself. A single walking onion plant, left to do its work, will populate an area of about 4 to 6 feet in diameter within 3 years through this self-replanting behavior. Every part of the plant is edible. the underground bulbs, the green hollow stalks, used like scallions, and the small bulbils themselves, used in cooking like miniature pearl onions. The plant is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9, covering essentially the entire United States, and survives winters that would kill most regular onions. Plant walking onion bulbs or topsets in fall or early spring in full sun in average well-drained soil. Space the initial plantings 6 inches apart. The first year, the plants establish their bulbs underground. The second year, they begin producing the tall stalks with topset clusters. By the third year, the original plants have walked outward, and the patch begins expanding on its own. From that point forward, you have onions in your yard forever, multiplying themselves at no cost, with no annual planting required. A first-year planting of 5 walking onion bulbs becomes a substantial onion patch within 5 years, producing enough onions for normal household use, and enough topsets to share with neighbors who will inevitably ask where you got these strange wandering plants. One practical detail worth knowing about walking onions in the kitchen. The underground bulbs are pulled and used like regular small onions. The green hollow stalks are cut and used exactly like scallions or green onions, chopped fresh into salads, soups, and stir-fries. The small topset bulbils harvested from the top of the stalk in summer can be peeled and used like miniature pearl onions in stews, pickled whole as cocktail onions, or replanted to start new patches in different parts of the yard. Every single part of this plant has a use, combined with the fact that the patch maintains itself indefinitely with no annual replanting. Walking onions deliver more practical kitchen value per square foot than almost any plant in this video. Plant 6. Chives, common, or garlic. The mild, gentle onion-flavored perennial that produces a continuous supply of savory green stems from early spring through hard frost in fall. Chives are the easiest perennial vegetable in American gardening to grow successfully. They tolerate almost any conditions, return reliably for 15 to 20 years from a single planting, and produce harvestable greens within weeks of planting. Common chives produce thin, hollow, round green stems with a delicate onion flavor, plus beautiful purple pom-pom flowers in late spring. Garlic chives produce flat green stems with a distinct garlic flavor, plus white flowers later in the season. Both varieties are completely edible from stem to flower. The flowers themselves are stunning in salads, sandwiches, and as garnishes. The plants form tight clumps about a foot tall and equally wide. Plant chive divisions or seeds in early spring, in full sun to part sun. Average garden soil works fine. Chives are not particular about soil quality. Space plants 12 inches apart. The plants grow quickly and begin producing harvestable stems within 6 to 8 weeks of planting in their first year. Harvest by cutting stems at the base, leaving about an inch of stem above the soil so the plant can regenerate. The plant produces new stems within days. Chives self-seed prolifically if the flowers are allowed to go to seed, gradually expanding the planting over time. To prevent excessive self-seeding, deadhead the flowers after they fade, but leave at least a few flowers to bloom because pollinators love them, and the small expansion of the patch is generally welcome. A single mature chive clump produces enough greens to supply a household with continuous fresh chives from April through November. Combined with the fact that fresh chives at the grocery store cost $3 to $5 for a small bunch that wilts within days, growing your own chives is one of the highest return perennial food investments in any American garden. Plant 7. Artichokes, Globe and Jerusalem. Both Globe artichokes and Jerusalem artichokes, two completely different plants that share a common name and produce two completely different foods. Both belong on this list, and both deliver remarkable yields from minimal effort. Globe artichokes are the familiar artichokes from the grocery store. The large green flower buds with thick fleshy bracts that you steam, dip in butter, and eat one petal at a time. The plant itself is striking, with silver-gray foliage, 3 to 4 feet tall, and dramatic spiky purple flowers if the buds are left to bloom. Globe artichokes are perennial in USDA zones 7 through 11. Lasting 5 to 7 years from a single planting in those climates. In colder zones, they can be grown as annuals, or overwintered with heavy protection. Plant in full sun, in rich, well-drained soil. Each mature plant produces 5 to 10 artichoke heads per year, replacing roughly $25 to $50 worth of grocery store artichokes annually. Jerusalem artichokes, also called sunchokes, are completely different. They are a native North American plant in the sunflower family, growing 6 to 10 feet tall, with cheerful yellow flowers that look like small wild sunflowers. The edible part is the underground tuber, which looks like a knobby potato and tastes like a sweet nutty cross between an artichoke heart and a water chestnut. The tubers are eaten raw in salads or cooked like potatoes, roasted, mashed, or in soups. Plant Jerusalem artichoke tubers in early spring in full sun in average well-drained soil. The plants tolerate poor soil and require almost no maintenance. Harvest tubers in fall after the plants die back from frost. The major thing to know about Jerusalem artichokes is that they spread aggressively. The tubers you do not dig up become next year's plants, and the patch expands every year. This is wonderful if you want a permanent, endless food source, and it is challenging if you wanted a tidy garden bed. Plant Jerusalem artichokes in a corner of the yard where their enthusiastic spreading is. A first-year planting of 5 tubers produces 20 to 30 pounds of tubers in fall, and the patch grows larger every year forever. Plant 8. Raspberries and blackberries. The bramble fruits that produce some of the most expensive berries at the grocery store, and some of the most rewarding berries to grow in any American backyard. A single small patch of raspberries or blackberries planted carefully this spring will produce abundant fresh fruit every summer for the next 15 to 20 years. The technical detail worth understanding about brambles is that the individual canes are biennial. Each cane lives for 2 years, producing fruit on second-year canes and then dying. But the root system is strictly perennial and continually sends up new fruit-bearing canes every year. Once you understand this, the pruning becomes simple. Each fall, cut out the canes that produced fruit that year, the dead 2-year-old canes, and leave the green first-year canes that will produce fruit next summer. Plant bramble canes in early spring in full sun in well-drained soil, amended with compost. Space plants 2 to 3 feet apart in rows 6 feet apart, or against a fence or trellis. Choose disease-resistant varieties. Heritage and Caroline are reliable raspberries. Triple Crown and Arapaho are reliable thornless blackberries. The first year, the plants establish their root systems and produce only small harvests. Year 2 and beyond, the harvests become substantial. A small bramble patch of 6 to 8 plants produces 10 to 20 pounds of fresh berries per year, replacing $100 to $200 worth of grocery store berries annually. Combined with the genuine flavor difference between a fresh-picked raspberry and a 5-day-old grocery store raspberry, the math becomes overwhelming. The patch returns reliably for 15 to 20 years before needing renovation. Many bramble plantings continue producing for 30 years or more with periodic care. Few decisions you make in your garden return more pleasure per square foot than planting a small bramble patch. Plant 9. Blueberries. The beautiful landscaping shrub that doubles as a massive food source for the rest of your life. A single high-bush blueberry plant, given the soil conditions it needs, can live and fruit reliably for 50 years or more, making blueberries one of the longest-lived perennial food plants any American homeowner can plant. Blueberries are not just productive food plants. They are genuinely beautiful landscape shrubs. Spring brings dainty white bell-shaped flowers in clusters. Summer brings the famous fruit. Fall brings dramatic red and burgundy foliage that rivals any ornamental shrub. Winter brings attractive red-stemmed structure even when leafless. A row of blueberry bushes along a fence or property line provides 4-season visual interest and food production simultaneously. The single critical requirement for blueberries is soil acidity. Blueberries need soil pH between 4.5 and 5.5, significantly more acidic than most American garden soil. If your soil is too alkaline, which is common in much of the country, you must amend the planting hole with peat moss, pine needles, and sulfur to lower the pH before planting. Without acidic soil, blueberries will struggle and eventually die. With proper soil preparation, they thrive for half a century. Plant blueberry bushes in early spring in full sun in acidic, well-drained soil. Plant at least 2 varieties together. Patriot and Blue Crop are reliable for most climates because cross-pollination dramatically increases fruit. Production. Space bushes 4 to 5 feet apart. Mulch heavily with pine needles or pine bark, which maintain the soil acidity over time. The first 2 years, the plants establish slowly. Year 3 and beyond, the harvests grow substantial. A mature high-bush blueberry plant produces 5 to 10 pounds of berries per year, replacing $30 to $60 worth of grocery store blueberries annually. Multiply that by 4 bushes for a small home planting and by 50 years of plant life, and the math becomes genuinely meaningful for a fixed-income household. One mistake to avoid with blueberries. Do not skip the soil pH test before planting. A simple home soil test kit from any garden center costs about $10 and tells you your soil pH within minutes. If your soil reads above 6.0, you have alkaline soil that will slowly kill your blueberry investment unless you amend significantly. The correction is real work, not just a sprinkle of additive. You need to incorporate peat moss, elemental sulfur, and pine bark deeply into the planting holes, and you need to continue applying acidifying amendments yearly to maintain the pH. The blueberries that fail in American gardens almost always fail because the homeowners skipped this step. The blueberries that thrive for 50 years are the ones planted into soil that was tested and properly amended before the plant ever went into the ground. Plant 10. Horseradish. The vigorous, unkillable perennial root that produces a lifetime supply of pungent, spicy, fresh horseradish from a single tiny piece of root planted once. Horseradish is so vigorous and reliable that the actual challenge of growing it is not keeping it alive. It is trying to stop it from expanding into the rest of your garden. Horseradish produces large, coarse green leaves above ground and a long, thick, white taproot below ground. The root is what you harvest, ground or grated, and mixed with vinegar to make the classic horseradish condiment served with prime rib, in cocktail sauce, or as a horseradish cream sauce. Fresh homegrown horseradish has a sharpness and intensity that bears little resemblance to the dusty preserved horseradish sold in small jars at the grocery store. One taste of fresh ground horseradish from your own root, and you will understand why this plant has been grown in American gardens for over 200 years. Plant horseradish root cuttings in early spring in full sun in deep, well-drained soil. The plant requires deep soil because the taproot grows long and thick, 12 to 18 inches deep at maturity. Choose a corner of the yard where the plant can spread without bothering other plantings, because horseradish does spread enthusiastically through underground runners, and any small piece of root left in the ground becomes a new plant the following year. Harvest horseradish roots in late fall after the first hard frost, which sweetens the roots. Dig up only what you need for the year. Trim the root tops, replant any small pieces you want to grow new plants, and store the harvested roots in the refrigerator, wrapped in damp paper towels. Fresh horseradish keeps for several months in cold storage. Grind a small amount as needed throughout the year. The active compounds that give horseradish its sharpness are volatile and lose potency quickly once exposed to air, which is why store-bought horseradish is always weaker than fresh. A single horseradish plant produces enough root for a household's entire annual horseradish needs and continues producing for the rest of the time you live in your home. Plant 11. Groundnut, Apios americana. And this is the second surprise of the video, the native North American plant I mentioned at the beginning that produces underground tubers, tasting like a cross between a potato and a nut. Groundnut is one of the most remarkable food plants in American horticulture, and almost no modern American gardener has heard of it. Groundnut is a native climbing vine in the legume family, related to peas and beans. The vine grows 6 to 10 feet long and produces beautiful clusters of fragrant maroon-brown flowers in late summer. Below ground, the vine produces strings of edible tubers, the size and shape of large marbles or small new potatoes, strung along the underground stems like beads on a necklace. The tubers can be harvested in fall and winter and eaten roasted, boiled, or fried like potatoes, with a distinctive flavor that genuinely tastes like a cross between potato and nut. Groundnut was a staple food of indigenous peoples across eastern North America for thousands of years before European colonization. The Pilgrims learned about groundnut from the Wampanoag people during their first hard winters and credited the plant with helping them survive. Despite this remarkable history, Groundnut has been almost entirely forgotten in modern American gardening, replaced by potatoes from South America and introduced crops. The plant deserves rediscovery in American backyards. Plant groundnut tubers in spring, in part sun to full sun. Near a fence, trellis, or arbor, the vine can climb. The plant treats a wide range of soil conditions, but prefers moist, humus-rich soil. Because it is a legume, groundnut also fixes nitrogen into your soil, improving the soil quality wherever it grows. The first 2 years, the plant establishes its root system and produces small tubers. Year 3 and beyond, the patch produces abundant tuber harvests of 2 to 3 pounds per plant per year. Groundnut is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 7, covering most of the eastern United States. A small planting of 3 groundnut vines becomes a permanent low-maintenance food source, producing high protein tubers indefinitely, and connecting your modern backyard back to 1,000 years of North American food history. The closing message: 11 perennial food plants, one initial investment of roughly $200 to $300 in starter plants, crowns, and tubers. The result is a substantial portion of your household food supply. Asparagus, rhubarb, strawberries, sorrel, walking onions, chives, both kinds of artichokes, raspberries and blackberries, blueberries, horseradish, and groundnut, growing reliably in your own backyard for the next 20 to 50 years from one planting season. The grocery store equivalent value of what these plants produce conservatively runs $800 to $1,500 per year for a small household, and the savings continue for the rest of the time you live in your home. Here is what I want you to take away from this video more than anything else. Perennial food plants are the closest thing American gardeners have to actual independence from the grocery store system. Annual vegetables require seeds, soil preparation, planting, weeding, and replanting every single year. Perennial foods require none of that after the first season. The plants do the work. You do the harvesting. The math compounds in your favor. Every year you keep them in the ground. And the food you grow yourself, from plants you planted with your own hands, is something the grocery store can never sell you no matter how much money you spend. Think about what this means for a moment. The asparagus bed you plant this April will still be producing spears when your grandchildren visit you in 15 years. The blueberry bushes you plant this spring will still be bearing fruit when those same grandchildren are old enough to bring their own children to bring. Your kitchen. The strawberries that carpet the ground around your house this season will keep producing for as long as you live there, and the patch you established becomes part of what the next owner inherits when the house eventually changes hands. Perennial food gardening is not just about saving money this year. It is about putting living things into the ground that outlast a single growing season and become a small, permanent part of what your home offers to anyone who lives in it. Before you go, drop a comment below telling me which of these 11 perennial foods you are going to plant this season, because I read every single comment, and your answers help me understand which plants matter most to my audience for future videos. Also remember the question I asked about the Plant Once Garden book earlier. Which of the 3 prices feels right to you for what is inside? Your honest answer makes a real difference. And subscribe to this channel right now, because next week, we cover another perennial gardening topic that ties directly into everything we just talked about. The yard is yours. The food is yours. Plant the perennials, and the rest happens on its own.